Okay, hello, welcome to day 2 of 780. This is where we get to dive right into your scoping review. We're going to finish it up. You are going to be working through the process of basically constructing a manuscript and getting it ready for submission for peer-reviewed publication. Now, for buy-in, I really want to flag for you, you may not see a research future in your future, but if you are going to become a skilled clinician, a specialist in an area, I work and collaborate with a lot of clinicians who are working with me on research and manuscripts and publications in their area of expertise. And so there's a really good chance that you are going to be involved in these types of projects in the future. I will also say I have friends at, hospital such systems such as Rady Children's that is actually requiring for promotion. They have different rankings of promotion and a requirement for the higher level occupational therapy positions is to have actual publications. So this can be an expectation for you even as a clinician. So I just wanted to flag this for you. Similarly, knowledge translation, I'll speak to that as well. So really, these are just critical skills to have a baseline familiarity with. So I'm really excited that we have this content for you in your training here to becoming an OT, especially with an OTD. I think it really makes a lot of sense. So I'm excited and I'm here to help you through that process because I also am familiar. So for our work, we are targeting the American Journal of Occupational Therapy. Usually when you begin a manuscript, you actually want to have your journal identified from the get-go, just because there are guidelines that will even guide you and dictate how you conduct your research, conduct your review, etc. But I have looked at the guidelines for AJOT and everything that you all have done at this point should align no problem. But just so you know, that's usually like good practice. Is if you are getting together with a group, you want to know what journal you're going to be targeting so that you can be looking at these author guidelines kind of from the get-go. So today, in the listed documents that I have attached for today's module, you will see that I have listed the AJOT, we call it AJOT, so it's the American Journal of Occupational Therapy. I have listed their author guidelines. This is the most important document of today. So I want you to find that document, bring it up on your desktop, have it there, print it out if you'd like. Every section of these author guidelines you need to pay attention to. That being said, I have written this out in the module, and I'm going to say this here. There are components of the author guidelines that decided I don't need to make you guys do, and some that you feasibly wouldn't have been able to do because the content isn't there. For instance, things like funding sources. You would have to have just said something silly like, I mean, it's not silly. If you didn't have funding, you state you didn't have funding. But I'm not going to make you do these components that are not necessary. So these are going to usually include a cover letter to the editor of the journal. I'm not going to make you do that. Acknowledgement section, funding, copyright sections, authorship, and financial forms. So again, I have listed these out below here in the module, the sections that you do not need to include, you do not need to pay attention to. So if it helps you, you could cross them out on your form of author guidelines. But every other section in the author guidelines, you want to follow to a T. Author guidelines will tell you things that should be in certain sections. They're going to mention things like formatting that you're to use. I know that you guys have been using the APA standards, for instance. There are different standards, and some journals might use different. So that's one way in which I know your work so far is going to align just fine with the AJOT author guidelines. So things that you will be making sure that you have completed as you finalize your manuscript in today is you need to have an abstract. And I want you to go read what AJOT expects the abstracts to contain, how they want you to structure it, and also a lot of the times there's a word limit that they put in there. So I want you to pay attention to that and construct your abstract for one that AJOT would accept. As you have done your lit searches, you probably have seen that abstracts can be just kind of like a chunk of a paragraph, or it can be broken into sections. There's a lot of different formats, and then of course lengths are different. And they're different because different journals have different guidelines or rules for what they want. So you're going to follow AJOTs and you're going to construct an abstract. Another thing I want to note that I don't know that has been touched on in your prior iterations of development of your scoping review at this point, but something that is now going forward always going to be a part of manuscripts and really just reflects the era that we're moving into. And that is disclosure of AI and use of AI. The disclosure AI components that are in author guidelines now, I think really reflects the reality of the fact that this is just a tool that folks are using now in writing, but we have to responsibly use that tool. And we also need to let folks know when we've used the tool and how, because that helps us factor in as we're reading. So I expect you all, if you have used AI for any component of your manuscript construction, to address that and include that in your manuscript, just as AJOT has outlined. So they have a really nice fleshed out section on this in the author guidelines. So my requirements for you are for you to follow the AJOT standards for disclosure of AI and language model systems that you may have used in developing your manuscript. If you have any questions about that, totally reach out to me. It's a new thing, I think, for all of us, but it's important, and it's important that we do this responsibly. Another thing I want to flag for you that I have listed for today's module is when you are finishing up a review, you've often spent a few months working on it. And in that time, new sources may have been published. So right before you submit, it is best practice to rerun your searches and make sure there's nothing you need to add. Fortunately, a lot of the times when sources come up, the data fits into themes and conclusions that you've already made. So it's just a matter of adding that source to your data, adding that source, referencing it as relevant within your manuscript, integrating it into any forms or tables that you might have. But that is an important thing to do to make sure that you're submitting the most up-to-date information in your manuscript. And then, so I touched on this. I also really want you to fine tune your data reporting chart. In my scoping review, you all will see how I formatted mine. There are similarities across authors and how you go about that. There's some pretty common columns that are typically included, etc. But there are differences. So I have included a few sample scoping reviews that I felt were of good quality. And they also do offer good examples of slightly different ways in which you can construct your data reporting chart. So this is where you're listing your source and then important information that you have gleaned from that source that's relevant to your question. You might also list things like level of evidence, geography of where the source came from is something that I included. There's lots of different things that you can consider and consider the relevance in what you're trying to speak to in your research question. Okay, that is all. Again, just flagging for you, author guidelines, that's your major guide for today. Your job for today is to get your scoping review in line with AJOT author guidelines, okay? Email me if you have any questions, and I will see you in day 3.